Hello again, and welcome to Perfectly Paranormal, episode 81. My name's Annaschmidt, and I'm here every week to share with you true paranormal encounters and information about devils, demons, and dark energy beings that no one else talks about. And today, we are opening our minds to the world of paranormal skeptics and their questions. Are ghosts real? And does paranormal activity exist, or is it just a state of mind? And I have to say, I really do love skeptics. And I can't wait to share the 11 skeptical reasons why doubters challenge paranormal activity. And I also have for you some slightly funny and not so funny experiences about paranormal skeptics that I've encountered through my work. Now, if there's any skeptics out there listening today, please stay tuned because you're really going to enjoy this episode just as much as everyone else. So one of the main arguments that skeptics have is that many of the experiences that are attributed to paranormal activity can be explained by psychological and environmental factors. And I do get that, totally. I always do the debunking before I think that something is paranormal, because as much as I'm a paranormal addict, there's always going to be rational explanations for why we hear and see and feel things. So you've always got to do that debunking. Now, despite the critical stance of skeptics, their work plays a critical role in advancing our understandings of both the natural and perceived supernatural worlds. By challenging paranormal claims, skeptics help promote rational thinking, absolutely, and encouraging people to inquire where beliefs are based, whether it's on evidence, whether it's logical reasoning, or whether it's just fear and superstition. Skeptics often face criticism from those who believe in the paranormal, like seriously believe in the paranormal. And I don't doubt skeptics. I seriously am on their side. Sometimes, quite often I sit on the fence. Is it paranormal? Is it something rational? I actually like doing the unpacking. I wouldn't say I'm a skeptic. As you know, I am a firm believer. But sometimes it's fun to try and see if there are logical, rational reasons why we see and hear and feel what is around us. Now, our first skeptical question, are ghosts real? And if you want my answer to that question, you pretty much know what I'm going to say. It's going to be yes, yes, and yes. But only because of the many years of personal experience that I've had from childhood. You've heard me talk about it all the time. And when you regularly experience the paranormal, it makes it real. Really, really does. And after you do all the debunking, like I said earlier, sometimes there is no possible logical, rational reason left to doubt. Now, the paranormal it encompasses lots of different types of energetic beings and other energy in the environment. I simply know that my answer is not for everyone, and I get it. I don't doubt skeptics. I actually like working for skeptics, especially when I'm clearing their personal energy or the energy of their homes. I'm going to talk about that later. That's one of our stories. So before we get to that, I thought you might like to hear the 11 rather logical reasons why skeptics doubt paranormal happenings. So what causes us to see ghosts, spirits, and wispy apparitions? And how do skeptics rationalise the paranormal? Now, number one, there can be medical conditions, such as eye conditions. And one that I found online was called Charles Bonnet syndrome, where one of the main symptoms is seeing things that are not real, because the brain needs to adjust to the eyes having significant vision loss So changes in the eye's vision and in impairment with the eyes can sometimes make you see things that aren't there, things that are blurry. And all the conditions that I suggest today, I'm going to leave the links in the description box so you can do more research if you want to. And also too, when we're talking about eyes, some people have reported seeing shadows out of the corners of their eyes, especially in poorly lit environments. And they thought they were going crazy. But we all have, to some degree or another, these odd, weird little black spots or dots or flecks or blobs, whatever you want to call them, that are commonly known as eye floaters. And what these eye floaters are, I've known about them for a long time. And I mean, simply, I have eye floaters, but they're nothing to do with the paranormal. It is such a tiny, wee little small dot that I see floating around. That is not the paranormal in the environment. So what eye floaters are is the aggregated changes to the jelly-like substance in the eyes. And some people get really fearful when they start to see these sort of black blobs and black shapes that are in the eyes. So always go and see your doctor if you start having changes in your vision. Now, number 2, this is a big one, and I deal with a lot of clients who go down this path. Substance abuse and going through withdrawal. Altered mind states and psychedelic drugs can make you see things that aren't there. They just simply do. Well, they do for some people. Some people just find that they get relaxed and they get very sleepy and they just, hey man, I'm just enjoying the vibe. Whereas some people, and I presume it depends on the person and their level of mental and emotional vulnerability and so forth, can actually bring traumas to the surface, which might come with horrible visions. They might see things they don't want to see. It might not necessarily be paranormal, but the visions can be quite frightening. Now, when people are going through withdrawal symptoms, this can be very complicated and very different for many, many people. And paranormal sightings and experiences can happen because as your body is detoxing all of the altered mind states and getting rid of all the drugs out of your system, the mind can play tricks. It simply can. And you might be seeing things that aren't there in front of you. Now, number 3, I've dealt with this a lot through my house clearing practices. People who are using attention-seeking behaviours. Sceptics and I agree on this one. Paranormal claims are great for getting attention, like serious attention, like mass attention. Who doesn't like getting onto one of the social media platforms and seeing someone frightened out of their wits because they've got spookies in their house, they've got paranormals in their house, doors are slamming, lights are flickering and so forth. People love the paranormal drama. You hear me talk about it all the time. And I see this on quite a lot of social media platforms. And when people like me who know what they're doing when it comes to dealing with the paranormal in homes, if there is paranormal there, when I contact these people offering help to resolve their issues, we just get ignored because, and this is the big reason, people want the attention. You know, it can be for many reasons. It could be for medical, mental health, emotional reasons. Are they lonely? Are they just seeking attention because they're bored in their life? Or do they like to frighten other people? That's another one. Are they manipulators? Who knows? But I did cover lots of different reasons for attention-seeking behaviours back in episode 59. So if you're interested in that, check it out. Now, number 4. Mental health conditions. This is another big one. And I'm going to be talking about that later on in the second question. So I'm not really going to repeat myself now. So stay tuned to hear about that. So number 5, I hope I say this right, hypnagogia. A friend suggested hypnagogia is a mind state that can cause people to see things that aren't there in our rational environment. And it's usually just before you're going to sleep. You get into that very relaxed state where you might be sort of slipping into the dream state and you start seeing things, but you feel like your body's awake, but your mind is starting to slip into sleep. And you might experience visual or auditory type things. I actually get a lot of body jerks when I'm going to sleep. Now for me, sometimes it's paranormal because I haven't done my daily spirit clearing and the spirits are annoyed because they just want to get into the afterlife. So I will just say to them that I'll help them in the morning. But sometimes it is just my body jerking. It's getting into that really relaxed state. Now this is the time when people talk about sleep paralysis. So that's another thing that people can experience, is that sleep paralysis type experience. Now, number 6, I hope I say this one right, pareidolia. This is a term that describes people perceiving patterns or connections that simply don't exist. Sometimes it's linked to the paranormal, sometimes it isn't. You lay back on the ground and you're looking at the clouds and your eyes and your mind are actually making shapes out of them because maybe you need to see that shape at that particular time. Maybe it's a spirit message. So quite often, paranormally, people think they see faces or shapes in random objects, or they might interpret ambiguous sounds as disembodied voices. Now, I can give you an example of pareidolia, which I actually think was paranormal, but we'll just talk about it. I went to visit a site here in Tasmania on the west coast. I talk about it a lot because there are lots of spirits there. Now, I took some photos. People who do paranormal investigation always talk about taking 3 photos in a row because you might see changes in the photos. Well, I took these photos and I didn't look at them close enough. I just went, nothing in those photos. So when I showed them to a friend, her eyesight is a little bit keener than mine. So what we did, we expanded or we zoomed into the photos. Oh my goodness. There were so many little faces in these photos. Technically, wasn't doing the pareidolia thing because I didn't expect to see anything because I'm a feeler. Remember, I feel the presence of spirits. So seeing them, it's not really on top of my list. But she saw them. She's like, oh, look, there's a little happy face. There's a grumpy face. There's an angry face. And when she showed them to me, you could clearly see the outline of a person's head. They were sort of child-sized, if that makes sense, because we were talking about an old abandoned hospital. There is a children's ward. There were lots of deaths at this particular place because of many of the diseases that used to go through society back in sort of the mid-late 1800s. So pareidolia, is it real? Is it not real? I think it depends on the situation, and I think it just depends on the situation. So we'll leave that at that. Number 7, environmental factors. These can play a part in tricking the mind, such as electromagnetic fields. All of the 5G and the mobile phones and the laptops and the iPads, we are literally carrying around all this electromagnetic energy on our bodies, in our bodies, around our bodies, in our homes. We are literally marinating in electromagnetic energy. This energy can affect sensitive people's perceptions. They can hear things, they can see things, they can feel things. So whether skeptics believe it or not, I'm just putting it out there. That environmental factors, they can influence people's energy. And also having those sort of strange patches of mould that you might see in the home. Are they paranormal? Are they energetic? Are they environmental? They're most likely environmental because of the damp in their homes. But there's also been movies. There's also been paranormal movies. There was one called Veronica. And I always mention Veronica for people who want to use Ouija boards because that movie was based on a real life experience where a young girl lost her life. And she'd used a Ouija board. She was traumatic. She wanted to see her father. If you want to watch a really interesting, it's eye-opening. But why I've mentioned Veronica is that when the detectives went into her home, where her and her siblings and her mum were living, there was these massive patches of mould under the beds. And some of them were in the shapes of people. So there's that pareidolia thing happening again. Were they energetic? Were they paranormal? More likely, they were environmental, because people have mould in their homes because of, damp conditions and so forth. Did that mould affect this girl's mind, on top of wanting to use the Ouija board and also her vulnerability and her grief for missing her dad? This is why I say to skeptics, there is always multiple factors that come into people and their emotions and their traumas and why they see the paranormal, why they think there are paranormal beings in their homes. And as we know, there are, because of the emotional imprints that we create. Now, let's look at number 8. Number 8 is the willingness to connect to the paranormal or paranormal addiction. I would imagine skeptics would say that the desire to experience the paranormal would make your brain create scenarios for paranormal happenings. This is both internally and externally. Now, this happens. People go on paranormal tours. They want to go on a ghost tour. They want to experience the tug on their clothes, or the whisper, or the pull on their hair, or the breathing on their face, or that sort of wafting breeze that wafts past them. Is it paranormal? Is it environmental? Could be a bit of both. You never know until you actually debunk each actual location. Now, if you want to have a full-on listen to paranormal addiction, I did a whole episode back in episode 19. And it's rather interesting because I share a lot of my paranormal experiences, and I'm a very rational, logical person. Don't take any medications. I'm not being influenced by any recreational drugs or any alcohol. I'm very, very clean living. I just live a healthy lifestyle. So my paranormal addiction is simply my interest in the paranormal, and I experience it in some places. I don't experience it in others. I don't go looking for it. Even though I've got paranormal addiction, I still do the debunking first. Always, always, always got to check the environment. Now, number 9. Number 9 is rather interesting. Vitamin B12 deficiency. Now you're going, what is she talking about? I read this online and I found it very, very interesting. One of the many symptoms of B12 deficiency can be altered visual and auditory senses. So that means seeing and hearing images and sounds and voices that aren't there. Now, number 10, money-making charlatans and the power of suggestion. Some people are so desperate to connect with loved ones on the other side that they can't see through the fake mediums, the cold readers and the tricksters who prey on people's personal trauma. They simply do. There are genuine, authentic readers out there. There are genuine, authentic mediums out there. But there are also people in the business who do it to prey on vulnerable people, which is very, very sad for them to think that that's how they want to live their lives, hurting other people and just taking their money. And number 11, is there scientific proof? Skeptics always go to the scientific, and I get that, because the scientific is tangible. When you're talking about paranormal beings, energy beings, anything that you can't see, it's very, very hard to prove. It's very hard to prove to people who aren't sensitive to the energy in the environment. Because some people just aren't. And quite often they're the very solid skeptics who are just going, I can't feel that, I can't see that, therefore it is not real. Well, that's a very closed way of looking at the world. So from a scientific perspective, the existence of ghosts is highly disputed, as you could imagine. I wonder what it would do to a scientist if they actually saw a ghost, whether they'd be open to it or whether they'd go into a scientific meltdown. Who knows? Paranormal investigators often use tools like electromagnetic meters. They pick up on the electromagnetic energy in the environment. Some paranormal investigators use infrared cameras and audio recorders attempting to detect and record ghostly presence. I mean, I've done this myself. It's actually a lot of fun. And a lot of the spirits like using these tools because they can communicate with people that aren't psychically open, who don't see them, hear them, feel them easily. And a lot of paranormal investigators are skeptics. That's part of the reason why they got into it, because they want to prove that it's not real. And in the whole process of doing it, they actually do prove that it is real. But I've known paranormal investigators from a very scientific background, and they use highly scientific equipment. And even when they do get readings or they do get recordings, they still doubt it. They still say that the results are inconclusive or easily debunked as natural happenings. I mean, seriously, scientists and skeptics argue that without undeniable evidence, the existence of ghosts remains a matter of personal belief rather than scientific fact. Now, what does it take to convince these people? I seriously want to know what it takes to convince them. Now let's dive into our 3 rather short little stories that are going to highlight different types of skeptics. These are interesting. You're going to love them. Now, story number 1. I've called this story The Table Tipping Leg Holder. Now, when I worked as a paranormal tour guide, we were at an abandoned mental health institution most of the time, and we used to use different buildings for different types of paranormal investigations using different types of equipment. Now, some of our tour guests would come on these tours to cause mischief and to basically debunk the paranormal. Well, the debunking's okay because everyone wants to do that. The mischief, on the other hand, is not. Because we as tour guides used to do the debunking as well. I remember one night I was standing out the front with the lady that ran the tours, and all of a sudden I got this cold breeze run past me and I went, "Oh, cold breeze." And then I looked up and there was a hole in the ceiling. So the air wafting around this very old building would have come through the air vents and down through that hole. And I was slightly embarrassed, but we just laughed it off. The lady that runs these tours is very, very ethical about giving her guests real experiences. And she would quite often say at the beginning of the tours when we were doing the introductions that we get a lot of responses to investigation equipment, but sometimes we don't. Sometimes we just simply didn't get any responses in specific buildings because those particular spirits weren't interested in communicating with the living, so they just don't bother. They just stay in their rooms or they just go somewhere else while we're doing the investigation. Well, you'll love this. One night we were doing some table tipping. It's one of the methods that we occasionally used to use to communicate with the spirits. And how table tipping works is we had a small round table with a single wooden stem and it had sort of 3 wooden feet. And the participants would sit around the table and they would place their hands sort of lightly on the table, palms flat, hands just sitting very lightly on the table. And what the spirits would do is that they would use our energy to tip the table to whatever we agreed, whether it was to tip it left for yes and right for no, whatever we agreed on the night. So on this night, our second group of guests, because we usually had like 10 people in each group, so we would go through and we would have groups of 4 having a go at this. So the second group of 4 sat down. There was myself and the 3 guests. Now we'd already been through the other guests in the group, and these 3 ladies were the final participants for the evening. Now the table had been happily tipping left and right and sort of moving and jiggling and just answering people's questions. The spirits in that particular building, they loved the table tipping method. It was something that was easy and fun for them to use, and they would quite often get a giggle. They would get a giggle out of the living people's responses to the table moving, because some people haven't seen table tipping before, and it can be a little bit confronting when you are seeing a tangible object move. Now, as soon as these 3 ladies sat down, the paranormal activity stopped. It was really odd. The spirits obviously want to use the table. They're interested, they're keen. We've had activity for the whole sort of 30 minutes we've been doing this with the other people in the group. Now, we sat there for 10 minutes with our hands flat on the table, just asking simple questions with a yes or no answer. And I could feel a type of resistance in the table, like it was trying to move but it couldn't. And I looked up suddenly and I caught a very smirky glimpse on two of the ladies' faces. And these ladies were sitting opposite each other. And I went, aha, these women are up to something. And I very quickly looked under the table. One of the women, she had her feet very firmly grasped around one of the table legs so it couldn't move. So I sat up and I thought, how do I handle this situation? So I looked at her and I very kindly asked her to remove her foot. So she just blankly looked at me and she refused. And I'm like, okay. So I asked her what the problem was. And this was her response. This is all BS and you are making the table move with your hands. And I went, okay, all right. I can understand that. You're a bit sceptical. No problem. So I said, if you could please remove your foot and we'll see what happens. So what happened was I removed my hands from the table and I asked the spirits to use the energy of the lady that had been holding the table leg. Now, when spirits use your energy, it doesn't hurt. It's not going to do anything to you. When you've got your hands on the table, you might feel a slight sort of cool touch on the top of your hand. Your hand might feel a bit tingly, it might feel warm, it might feel cold, depending on how the spirits use their energy. It doesn't hurt. What they're doing is they're simply connecting with your energy on the table. Well, you're going to love this. Before I'd even finished my sentence, because the spirits knew what I was going to say, the table gently slid a foot across the floor. It was like someone had pushed it. Now, the two women, they were gobsmacked. They shot out of their chairs like lightning. I've never seen people move so fast in a very dark, abandoned building. It was really quite funny, but I didn't laugh. I was very professional. I kept a very professional front because remember, I was there as the tour guide. And they're both looking at each other going, oh, what's going on? And I said, well, I just looked at them because I stayed very calm, like I said earlier. I just looked at them and I said, now are you going to respect the spirits? They are doing this for your benefit, not theirs. They simply want to say hello. Now, I asked these two ladies, would you like to sit down and have another go? No, both women, they were so red-faced and they just shook their heads. They just, no, not doing it. But there was two other people who were really, really keen and they were in the chairs at the table waiting. Oh, love them. They couldn't wait to have another go. Now, the table, it moved. Like, I love table tipping. I'd never experienced it until I became a paranormal tour guide because I just use very simple dowsing, pendulum dowsing and copper rod dowsing. But the table is amazing to see it move. Now, I can understand the skeptics saying, oh, you're moving it. But if you have four people laying their hands on top of a table and their hands are just resting on top of the table, you would know if the person next to you or the person across from you is pushing it. You would see movements. You would see the body jerk forward. You might see the hands trying to grasp the table harder so you can actually push it. Spirits don't need you to do that. You simply put your hands on the table and you just sit there and wait for them to start moving the table. One little funny thing about table tipping that I will share. We were in another building on this site one day. We were upstairs and there were three of the tour guides. We're sitting around the table waiting for the tour to start and we thought, oh, we'll get some table tipping in before it starts. Well, we sat down and, like I said, hands resting on top of the table. We were just talking to one of the nurses and all of a sudden one of the other ladies said, did you live on this site? And we got the tip for yes. And we thought, oh, let's be a bit cheeky. Can you please show us the building that you lived in? So what the table did, with us holding on to it, we had to push our chairs out like super quick and stand up. The table very, very slowly slid towards the door. And it had to kind of walk itself out the door. It was really complicated. Three people with their hands on the table trying to get through a doorway with a table. What the table then proceeded to do was to slide across this wooden floor to the window at the end of the building. It was maybe, I'm not good with distances, maybe 8 to 10 metres. Like, we've got our hands on this table. And the lady that ran the tours, she was in the big, large area outside this little room that we were in. And she looked at us as we kind of ran past her, trying to keep up with this table. The table stopped at the window facing the nurses' quarters. And we thought, oh, well, that makes sense. Now, our second skeptical encounter happened in early 2024. And I've called this experience Jenny's Haunted Dream. Now, a friend of mine, she's a very rationally minded psychologist, and the energy world and paranormal just simply does not fit into her realm of thinking. It just doesn't. Until one night when she experienced a dream that was beyond the reality of her normal dreams. She woke up extremely frightened, sweating and frantic. And this franticness was in her mind and her body. And she felt hate-fueled emotions like hatred and blame and guilt and bitterness and resentment. Now, these emotions weren't hers. They just weren't her normal way of being. She was a very calm lady, very nice, very rational. Now, she sat with this, trying to nut out a logical reason for why she had this dream. And it wasn't just one dream. This was probably the worst one of a few. But she simply couldn't come to a conclusion. She just couldn't come to a conclusion that settled her rational mind. So Jenny contacted me really as a bit of a last resort. She'd done the medical thing. She'd done the mental health thing. So she went, well, maybe Anna can help. Maybe it's energetic. Because if she didn't get this sorted out soon, these irrational goings on, they were starting to affect her thinking and her functioning in the family and at work and socially. She just couldn't function. But she couldn't come to a conclusion that settled her mind. Now, Jenny said to me, and this is important, so remember this. She said, do the energetic clearing, but don't tell me when you're going to do it. Because she didn't want to think herself into me fixing the problem at a specific time on a specific day. And that, probably it was all just psychological from the start. So I tuned into Jenny's energy by looking at a photo of her face. Now, she provided me that photo, and I didn't tell her when I was going to do it. Now, I picked up straight away that there were energetic attachments. Now, these attachments had got into Jenny's brow chakra, her crown chakra, into her actual brain and her mind, and in her governing meridian line. Now, the issues were present for a very private reason that I'm not going to share today. But I will say that once I cleared the energetic issue, the negative emotional imprints that were Jenny's and other people's, and the paranormal entities that were attached to Jenny because of the emotional imprints, she was as clean as an energetic whistle. Now, within the hour, Jenny messaged me and she said, have you done that energy clearing? I bet you have, haven't you? And I went, yes, actually, I have. And I told her the time that I finished. She was speechless. She couldn't rationalise how it all worked, but it did work. And now Jenny sits on the fence when it comes to energy work. I've done a few more mini clearings for Jenny since then, and she's still a fence sitter, and that's 100% okay. But she's open to energy work as a possibility. And after experiencing it firsthand, that really made a big difference for Jenny. Now, our third very short little story is about a man that contacted me to do a house clearing. Now, he told me outright, he said, I am totally sceptical about this, but I can't put my finger on what it is. I've had the plumbing checked, I've had the electricals checked, I've even bought a new modem. He said, everything is going wrong in this house. I just can't find the problem. And a friend recommended you to me. So I'm here against my will. He literally said that. I'm here against my will, but I'm willing to give it a go. Now, this man had bought a house that had a very deeply ingrained, how can I put it, recreational substance history. It had been a drug den in the past. So you know where I'm going with this, is that there'd been a lot of trauma imprints, a lot of emotional imprints, a lot of recreational drug residual energy that would be present in the place simply because of the people, but also the drugs being present. Anyway, I do very detailed reports. And he was quite shocked. He had known that it had been a drug den because when he bought the house, it was privately sold to him and he knew. The owner was very open about this is what it had been. We've had all the carpets cleaned and so forth. It's all very clean inside. And he needed a house. We'll put it this way. The price of the house fitted his budget. So he bought the house. But do you think he could sleep? He said, I've tried sleeping in every room. I just can't sleep. I can't sleep. And he said, I feel like I'm not on this planet. Now, this is coming from a very rational, skeptical man. Now, he wouldn't even give me his surname. I called him George G, because he was like, no, I work for the government and I don't want to give you my surname. And I went, that's fine. So when I tuned into the house, I said the address and that George G lived there. That's all I needed. After receiving my very detailed report and having 4 good nights' sleep, George emailed me and he went, I don't know what you've done, but it's better. He said, I don't believe in what you do. He still didn't believe. God love him. God love his soul. He doesn't believe in what I do, but it made it better for him. So there's 3 different types of skeptical behaviours. I hope you enjoyed those. So let's answer our second skeptical question. Does paranormal activity exist, or is it just a state of mind? Now, the question of whether paranormal activity exists or is a mere state of mind has been a long subject of debate between scientific people, skeptical people, and the metaphysical communities. People all have different beliefs, and we all have to respect each other for that. And energetic awareness is generally not on the scientific or the skeptical radar. It just simply isn't. And when you add paranormal activity that's encompassing sort of extrasensory happenings, such as seeing ghostly movements or telekinesis or psychic abilities, or other events that simply defy the laws of nature, it really does baffle the scientific and the skeptical minds. They just don't get it. But when they do experience those things, what it does is it actually plants the seed. Like George G. He couldn't find a rational reason for the issues in his home. He just simply couldn't. And he had to consider that there might be an energetic issue. Although there have been, this is really interesting, I saw something on YouTube the other day. There's been a few sciencey type people, a few skeptics, who have experienced near-death experiences. And more often, they're open now to the possibility because of their personal experiences. These people now give weight to the possibility of life after death, which means they have to admit that the paranormal is real. So skeptics, as we know, they always argue that the paranormal activity is largely a state of mind, being influenced by either psychological issues, neurological, or environmental factors, or all 3. They do contend, though, that many experiences deemed paranormal can be explained by cognitive bias, such as human tendencies to find the patterns and to make the connections, like we talked about earlier with the pareidolia. And when people have sleep paralysis, do they want it to be paranormal? Do they want that adrenaline rush? Do they want that fear experience? Because that can promote that in the person and that can contribute to the perception of paranormal events because people want it. And also things like the environmental factors, such as the electromagnetic fields, like I mentioned earlier, the 5G towers and our addiction to electronics. And also things such as infrasound, which I had to look up what that means. Infrasound, which are sound waves or frequencies. They affect us. We are energy in these bodies. So whether skeptics like it or not, too bad. Because we are energy, we are soul energy in these energy bodies, in these physical bodies, We are affected by the environment. So the infrasound, the sound waves, the frequencies, the electromagnetic energy, it does sometimes influence our thinking. But I live in this reality. I have an iPad, I have a laptop, I have a TV, and I still experience the paranormal. It's different. It is totally different. And until all the skeptics have their own experiences, they will never really know. Now, when we're talking mental health, which I was going to talk about earlier in our list, the questions regarding mental health and paranormal influences, I covered this fully back in episode 80. I did a really in-depth exploration of the energetic side of mental health and paranormal presence, paranormal influences, how they can influence people who are mentally and emotionally vulnerable. Paranormal beings don't cause the mental and emotional vulnerability, but they enhance it. They know how to poke us to get what they want. They will enhance people's mental health conditions if they are vulnerable in that way to creating the food that these paranormal beings want. So check it out for an interesting look at my experiences of living with my mum, God love her. She had schizophrenia, or so the doctors said. In that episode, I talk about her psychic abilities. And was it a combination of mental and emotional and psychic abilities? So what do you think? Are you a skeptic, or are you a true believer of the paranormal? Or do you simply choose to sit on the fence? Skeptics and believers are more than welcome. You want to email me or leave me a fan mail message with a question or a comment, or share a paranormal or an odd experience that you can't explain that might be paranormal. I welcome them all. So in episode 82, we are stepping away from the dark realm to connect with David Shemetsky. David is an inspirational speaker and a deep message expert who opens your eyes to aligning with your life journey in the best way possible, whether on a personal or on a business level. David has had paranormal experiences. So he's going to be sharing some of his mediumship and his Reiki journey, and also some of his rather personal, very heartfelt and most memorable paranormal experiences with you next week. So stay tuned for another fascinating episode of Perfectly Paranormal. If you like this spooky content of this episode today, please hit the subscribe button and you will get a notification when every new episode is released to the public. And stay tuned for many, many more episodes unpacking the strange and unseen aspects of the paranormal world around us. So thank you for joining me today. And don't forget, if you want to share a paranormal experience just with myself, or you would like me to share one of your experiences through my podcast, you can do a voice recording, or you can write out your experience and I will read it exactly as you have written. You can email me at spiritualbeing44@gmail.com. And for information on paranormal house clearing, you can visit my website, Spiritual Being. You will find the address in the description box. And I look forward to sharing this spooky space again with you next week. And remember, life is perfectly paranormal.